Bob Crane was born in Waterbury, Connecticut on July 13, 1928. From a young age, he had a strong passion for playing the drums. In middle school, he started organizing local drum and bugle parades with friends from the neighborhood and Norwalk Symphony orchestras. After graduating from Stamford High School in 1946, Bob joined the Connecticut Army National Guard. He was honorably discharged in 1950, the same year he married his high school sweetheart, Ann Erzian. Together, they had 3 children, Robert David, Deborah Ann, and Karen Leslie. It wasn't until 1950 that Bob found his true calling as a radio DJ. He started out at Hornell, New York's Walter L. Eberhart Sr. and Associates, then moved on to Bristol, Connecticut's WBIS, and Bridgeport, Connecticut's News Radio 600 WICC. But it was his big break at Columbia Broadcasting System's Knowledgeable Network Exchange in Los Angeles that changed his life forever. When Bob heard there was an opening for the morning show at Knowledgeable Network Exchange, he knew he had to jump at the opportunity. He and his wife came out to California to check things out since their family had never been there before. They were all New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey people. Once he got the job, Bob was on the morning show 6 days a week from 6 to 10 in the morning. His son, Robert, recalls that this was a turning point for the family. The thing that got our family out to Los Angeles from Connecticut was that there was an opening on the morning show at Columbia Broadcasting System Knowledgeable Network Exchange. Once he took the job, he was on the morning show 6 days a week from 6 to 10 in the morning. Robert, Bob Crane's son, speaks highly of his father's improvisational skills as a radio DJ. Bob had a remarkable ability to improvise on the spot without writing anything down. He would cover topics based on news events, sports, or anything else that was going on. Bob would even interview guests on his show. Robert recalls watching his father in action and being amazed at how he could seamlessly pull things together. Bob had 4 turntables around him, and this was in the days of vinyl records, long before digital music. He wore a microphone almost like a horse collar so that he could stand up and move around. In one corner, he had a small drum set where he would drum along with songs playing on the radio. Despite the chaos that may have appeared on the surface, Bob was always in control. He knew exactly what he was doing and how to make it entertaining for his listeners. Remarkably, Bob accomplished all of this without ever drinking coffee. He was fueled solely by his love for what he was doing and his desire to make people laugh and have a good time. It's no wonder he became so beloved by his listeners. Robert says, he loved radio until he died, but Gig Young and Jack Lemmon were 2 of his acting idols. Those 2 actors performed both light comedies and tragic parts. He so reasoned, "I'm in Hollywood now. Theater, television, and movies are all available. I'd want to try my hand at it." And he received a few favors. Rod Serling provided him with a brief narration for The Twilight Zone when he was on his radio program. The Dick Van Dyke Show, which was the top comedy show on television, was produced by Carl Reiner, and that's when he got his big break as a philandering spouse. Bob Crane's career continued to flourish, and he landed a recurring role on The Donna Reed Show as Dr. Dave Kelsey. He appeared on a total of 62 episodes between 1963 and 1965 while still doing his radio show. In fact, he had to pre-tape part of his morning show because he'd have to be on a set at 8 in the morning. Despite being busy with his radio show and recurring role, Bob's big break came with Hogan's Heroes. He was cast as Colonel Robert Hogan, the senior-ranking POW officer. But he still had to juggle both the radio show and filming for the first 6 to 8 episodes of the first season. Eventually, he realized that he couldn't do both and had to leave Knowledgeable Network Exchange at the end of August. It was a risky move, especially considering the concept of the show. A comedy about a group of Allied prisoners held at a German prisoner of war camp during World War II. The show was set to follow the prisoners as they carry out missions of subterfuge from within the camp, constantly outwitting the Nazis in command, or so they thought. Despite the unusual concept, the show was a hit. Bob starred alongside Warner Klemperer as Colonel Wilhelm Klink, John Banner as Sergeant Hans Schultz, Ivan Dixon as Sergeant James Kinchlow, Larry Havis as Sergeant Andrew Carter, Robert Clary as Corporal Louis LeBeau, and Richard Dawson as Corporal Peter Newkirk. Hogan's Heroes became a beloved classic, and Bob Crane's performance as Colonel Hogan was one of the show's highlights. Back in the 1960s, Bob Crane was offered a role in a new television series called Hogan's Heroes, following his recurring role in the Donna Reed Show. Despite the unusual premise of a comedy set in a German prisoner of war camp during World War II, Bob was intrigued by the idea. However, he was initially hesitant, telling his agents that he wanted to do a comedy. His agent reassured him that Hogan's Heroes was indeed a comedy. Bob's son, Robert, marvels at the fact that such a show could only have happened during that era. In 1965, just 20 years after the end of World War II, the concept of a comedy set in a POW camp could have been considered offensive. Some people even mistakenly believed that it was a show about a concentration camp, which would have been completely inappropriate. Despite these concerns, there was a palpable excitement surrounding Hogan's Heroes before it even aired. Columbia Broadcasting System executives, sponsors, and writers visiting the set were all impressed with the show. It went on to run for 6 seasons, a remarkable achievement for any television series. Robert is grateful for the show's success and the opportunity it provided for his father to showcase his talents. During the first few seasons of the show, Robert recalls his family hosting Christmas parties with the cast. He remembers being in awe of actors like Richard Dawson and John Banner. Everyone enjoyed each other's company and had a lot of laughs, but the show didn't get the chance to have a final episode. Hogan's Heroes went off the air in 1971, and Bob Crane thought the next stage of his career would be easy, but it wasn't. He wanted to appear on several popular shows, including Quincy, The Doris Day Show, Love American Style, and Night Gallery. However, he was also looking for another show of his own. It took 4 years to get a series, but it turned out to be a flop. The show started as a single-camera filmed show called Second Start, which was about a man in his 40s who forgets he doesn't want to do his job and now wants to go to med school and become a doctor. The show sounded similar to Carol's second act. The show was produced by Mary Tyler Moore's company, which was a good thing, but it wasn't with creative people like Jim Brooks and Alan Burns, who had produced successful shows like The Bob Newhart Show, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Rhoda, and Phyllis. Eventually, Second Start turned into a 3-camera filmed live show in front of an audience, which Bob enjoyed. Hearing the audience's laughter was amazing to him, but the show just didn't work. It was up against The Waltons, which was a huge show, and it only lasted 13 episodes. Robert reflects on the difficult transition from Hogan's Heroes to other projects for his father and how challenging it was for him to find success again. Bob Crane, after the failure of his television show, decided to try his luck with dinner theater. He got involved with a few plays, including one called Beginner's Luck, which he rewrote and tailored to himself. Despite it being about a cheating husband, he performed it in front of live audiences in many cities. Bob directed the play, which was easy to tour because it only had 4 characters. He tried his hand at a few films but didn't have much success, and so stuck with Beginner's Luck and dinner theater in general. Despite the difficulties of working in the entertainment industry, Bob remained optimistic and believed that something good was going to happen. He knew that he would be in front of hundreds of people every night at 8 o'clock, and that gave him a sense of purpose. He had perfected the play to the point where he knew where the laughs were, and that made him feel good day by day. However, he also saw other people getting roles that he wasn't getting, and the competition was fierce, which started to get to him. Robert recounts a story that takes us back to the year 1978. Bob Crane, the actor, was on the road in Scottsdale, Arizona, performing in a play while going through a divorce from his second wife. It was a tough time for him as he had bills to pay. He was supposed to stay in Scottsdale for a month, but little did he know that this was where his life would come to an end. During that time, he was friends with a man named John Carpenter, who worked as a salesman for Sony and other companies that sold home video equipment. Carpenter would visit Bob on his sales trips, and they would hang out together at night, looking at women and having a good time. However, things took a turn for the worse in June of 1978, when Bob decided that his friendship with Carpenter had become a pain and wasn't fun anymore. He realized that he needed to make some changes in his life. He wanted to get a divorce from his wife, Patty, and start over with a new house in Los Angeles. Despite the difficulties he was facing, Bob felt optimistic that things were going to get better. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out the way he had hoped. One night, at around 3 o'clock a.m., Bob was bludgeoned to death. His body was found by his acting co-star, Victoria Berry, who had grown worried when Bob didn't show up for their appointment. Robert continued his retelling of the events. He was hit twice in the head while he was asleep with a blunt object, which the police believe was a tripod from one of his cameras. The Scottsdale police were not used to dealing with such a high-profile murder. They only had 2 murders a year in 1978. The police immediately went to John Carpenter, who they believed had the means and opportunity to commit the crime. They thought that Carpenter, being in the video business, would know that a tripod from a camera would make a good blunt instrument. Carpenter was the prime suspect, and remained so until the very end. John Carpenter was brought to trial in 1994, and the trial lasted for about 6 weeks. During the trial, Robert was on the stand and could only provide a quote from his father about Carpenter being a pain and needing to make changes in his life. However, the jury did not believe that Carpenter was guilty, and he walked free. Carpenter died in 1998 from a heart attack, leaving the case unsolved. Robert explained that the case is still considered unsolved, but it is more accurately described as frozen because there has been no evidence or leads in years. The suspect is gone, and the DNA evidence has been used up and no longer exists. There is nothing for investigators to base anything on, so the case remains unsolved. Robert concludes that unless the missing tripod suddenly shows up, there is little hope for closure in his father's murder case. What will be Bob Crane's legacy in light of all that has transpired? In addition, he was destined to portray Colonel Hogan. Even while I don't watch the program all that much any longer, every time I do, he's the only actor I can picture playing the part. Goodbye and rest in peace, legend actor Bob Crane.